Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Friday. My name is Emma Maynard, and I am the Assistant Director of Career and Network Programming here in the Alumni Relations Office. I'm also a proud double Duke of the university, having graduated in 2007 with my bachelor's in sociology, and again, just recently in 2016 with my master's degree in adult education. Today's webinar is brought to you by the JMU Alumni Association, and we are so excited to bring you this alumni webinar program with the goal of providing career-related resources that help you conveniently cultivate your professional self, no matter what your distance is from Harrisonburg. I want to thank each and every one of you all for participating today, whether that is live or if you will be reviewing this once it is recorded. Before I introduce today's speaker, I just want to cover a few brief housekeeping notes for you. If you are participating live today, please note that your microphones are muted for the presentation. However, you do have some chat options. So at the top right-hand corner of your screen, you should have a chat icon that you can open up if it's not already open to make sure that you can utilize that during the presentation. As you have questions of the presenter, I want to ask that you please use the Q&A feature and send your questions privately to me, the host. And then I'll be sure to share those at the end of the webinar with our presenter today. You can also use your chat option during the presentation if you'd like to engage in real time with your fellow Dukes by selecting all participants or attendees, typing your response and feedback, maybe some tips that you've learned along the way, and selecting send. We'd also love to see you live tweet if you do have a Twitter account during the webinar, also using hashtag JMU as well as hashtag JMUAAwebinar. As a reminder, the webinar will be recorded and will be accessible on our website in the Career and Networking section. With that, I'd like to introduce today's presenter. Graduating from JMU in 2012, Robert Eric Wagner majored in media arts and design with a journalism concentration. He also minored in creative writing. Since then, Robert has been on a road of self-discovery, starting in 2009 with a 33-day cross-country bicycle ride with his father. He drew inspiration from dozens of compelling personalities both on and off the road. Compelled to share his story with those who might benefit from his experiences, Robert went on to write his first memoir, Leaving It on the Road, which was released in May of 2016. Robert continues to pursue his passion of pushing himself both physically and mentally in every pursuit. After working in the fitness industry for 2 years, he moved to San Francisco to work as both a personal trainer and a spinning instructor. Although recently switching careers, Robert still maintains his fitness blog and runs his own online fitness consultation adventure training business. With that, I'd like to push things over to our presenter today to lead his presentation on Leaving It on the Road.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you to the JMU Alumni Association for considering me for this webinar, and thank you those who are currently listening in. Before we get started, I would like to just talk about how Leaving It on the Road in fact came to be. In Florida, while I was training for my very first century ride in preparation for my cross-country bicycle ride, I was talking with my mom, and she asked me, what exactly do I like about riding the bike? You see, sometimes I would be on that bike for about 5 to 6 hours at a time, and in this case, for my first century ride, it took me about 9 hours to complete. It's about 100 miles on the road. So at some point, you have to ask, there has to be some level of enjoyment, otherwise why would someone like me do this? So I thought about it, and I told her that when I'm on the bike, all of my worries and my doubts, my hang-ups just disappear, and I'm free. Like I was leaving behind all those negative feelings in my mind, and it was just me and the road. And so the idea of leaving it on the road was created. Today, we're going to talk about the ride itself, why I did it, and 5 life lessons that you can hopefully apply to your own life from my experiences on the road. So let me first introduce myself. Once again, my name is Robert Eric Wagner, but my friends call me Eric, and you can too. I'm 26 years old, and I currently work as a junior data analyst in Charlotte, North Carolina. Like many millennials, I've gone through several jobs in the past several years. I worked as a concierge at a retirement home. I was a junior copyright editor for a big pharma company. And of course, I was a personal trainer, both independently and working at several different branch gyms, as well as a spinning instructor. R.E. Wagner is my author name. I've always liked the sound of it, kind of like J.K. Rowling or L.R.L. Stein. And like Emma mentioned, I graduated MAD at JMU in 2012 with a Bachelor of Arts, concentration in journalism, and minoring in creative writing. My passions include biking, obviously, hiking, physical fitness, writing, cooking, fantasy sci-fi novels, comic books, specifically Marvel, and pretty much anything outdoorsy. So 4 years ago exactly to this day, on April 21st, my father and I dipped the rear tires of our bicycles into the Pacific Ocean with over 20 other riders. We started in Newport Beach, California in 2013 and ended in Amesbury, Massachusetts on May 23rd, which was just 6 days shy of my 23rd birthday. Together, we rode over 3,400 miles in just 33 days across 14 states. That averages to about 100 miles per day. So think of that century ride, about 9 hours on the bike, and multiply that by 33 days. That's a lot of hours on the bike. We endured rain, wind, snow, which happened, believe it or not, in Dalhart, Texas, of all places, rode up hills, mountains, and through scorching deserts over 100 degrees. We faced dehydration, sunstroke, were even chased by dogs and sometimes angry truck drivers. But in the end, we finished. Now you have to ask yourself, what sane person voluntarily puts themselves through something like this? It's a question with a simple answer. I had absolutely no idea what to do once I graduated. Like many of you might experience, once you cross that stage and sit back down with your diploma, the unspoken question arrives, what's next for me? Some people know exactly what they want the minute they step foot on campus. I have always admired people like that, people who knew what they wanted to be, doctors, veterinarians, lawyers, and let nothing stand in their way of that dream. One of my best friends from high school, Noelle Diana, knew she wanted to be a vet since she was a little girl. In fact, she told me when her guinea pig had died, rather than cry about it like most of us would after losing a beloved pet, instead she stuck it in the freezer because she wanted to dissect it later, much to the horror of her mother. I was actually fortunate enough to see her during my bike ride in Ohio State, where she was currently getting ready to graduate from vet school. 3 of my best friends from JMU, who you will have seen by the end of this presentation, were just like those people. One became a Marine, another a police officer, and the last is currently finishing his law degree in Arizona State. My best friend Pat, who was a former JMU student body president of 2012, turned to me one night during my sophomore year while we were rooming together in Rockingham Hall, which I'm not even sure exists at this point anymore. It may have been torn down. It was an old motel right alongside 81. But he turned to me and told me he was going to join Marines, and I didn't doubt him for 1 second. 2 years after leaving JMU, I was fortunate enough to attend his graduation at Quantico. However, I am not one of those people. Once college was over for me, I didn't have a clear goal anymore. No one to really show me the way to a job or career that would give me purpose and fulfillment. To be perfectly honest, I didn't even know myself. I didn't even know what questions to start asking. In fact, I kind of assumed that I would have gotten those answers by the end of my 4 years at JMU. All I knew when I graduated was that I loved to write. It brings me more happiness than anything in the world. Still, there's that big question. What's a guy supposed to do with a major in journalism and a minor in creative writing? Work at a newspaper, duh. Well, in the post-graduation, during the summer of my post-graduation, I went on job interviews, just like many of you will. I can still remember my first job interview was for an editor's position at a local magazine. I dressed up in my full suit, arrived 15 minutes early, only to find there was no secretary to greet me. I waited for half an hour before someone actually came and got me. As we walked through the office, I noticed that most of the desks were empty, and most of the lights had been turned off. It was an eerie feeling. It almost felt like I was walking through a ghost town, and I remember nervously asking if everyone was on summer vacation. After all, it was the summer. My interviewer, the chief editor of the magazine, was pretty blunt. He told me that over 2/3 of the staff had been laid off within the past year. Circulation was down. People just weren't reading the news in the old school format like they used to. Layoffs were up. The landscape of journalism has changed. But how did this happen? With the rise of social media journalism, we now live in a world of instant information. I bet most of you get your news through some form of social media. You got Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat, of course. It's a fast-paced, up-to-the-minute kind of journalism, and I learned that most professionals burn out after less than a decade. For me, it didn't seem like a career I was interested in. Believe it or not, Facebook hasn't always existed. Back when I was in high school in 2008, Facebook was just becoming a thing. Even then, it was still only mostly used by college kids, and people like to joke that my generation just missed the social media boom. Now, in 2017, if you don't have at least one social media account, people think you're pretty weird. Still, I knew this type of journalism, wasn't going to be my full-time career. But I had just gone to school for 4 years for a major in journalism. Okay, so what then? I knew I loved to write. I knew what my passions were. But now I wasn't even sure if there was a sustainable future in the field I had majored in. This was the first major detour in my life, which I'll explain more later. I wrestled with this question my entire postgraduate summer. What do I do with this degree? By July 2012, while most of my friends had at least secured some type of employment, I was working as a part-time maintenance assistant at a retired community center near my home. My parents saw my struggle, and in August of 2012, my father, a retired Army Ranger, approached me with an idea. He explained that a lot of kids take off a year once college is over. Some go backpacking across Europe. Some drive across America to see this incredible country. What he wanted to do was slightly different. Join a group of cyclists in April 2013 for a bicycle ride across the United States. He had always wanted to do this and explained that now that I was out of college and those big bills were paid off, he saw that I needed some time to collect myself and told me about this idea that he had. At JMU, I had been part of the triathlon club, and I had grown to love riding the bike. And because I lacked the direction, I figured that focusing on this epic ride might give me some of the answers I had been looking for. So today we're going to talk about the 5 life lessons I learned on the ride. The first, getting outside your bubble. The second, finding your wolf pack. The third, as I mentioned before, encountering detours in life. The fourth, everyone falls off the bike. And last, ride your own road. When you push yourself outside your comfort zone, there's always a period of stress. It can be physical, like the bike ride, or mental, like finding a job or starting a new career. I can still remember on the 9th day of my bike ride, I had just come off a rest day. We had 3 in total during the 33 days, and my body was in so much pain. Our ride leader had told us that we should stretch, but I didn't really listen. I thought I knew better. We were riding out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, facing down 137 miles of open road and over 8,000 feet of climbing through the mountains, through the desert. At least 4 or 5 times, I thought about giving up on the ride entirely, especially in the beginning of the day. I even had a whole speech prepared. Thanks for thinking I could do this, but I think I'm going to call it a day. I'm sorry I let you down. At one point, I remember passing by this postal truck on the side of the road with its hazard lights on. Nobody was in the truck, and it didn't look like anyone else was around. I thought about stealing it. I had a whole scenario in my mind where I was going to be living in Mexico for the next few months and laying low. That idea kept me entertained for about the next 20 miles. Still, I kept thinking, what am I doing? Who did I think I was that I could do something like this? I wanted to quit so badly, but still I kept going. 13 hours later, with the sun going down, I eventually made it, exhausted but proud despite wanting to quit almost every mile of the way. I felt a lot of these kinds of emotions of any job I've ever started, whether it was a personal trainer in San Francisco, a copy editor in New Jersey, or a junior data analyst in Charlotte. College is amazing in so many ways. You have your structured class schedules, meal plans, and teachers to give you advice and offer words of wisdom. I remember one of my SMAD professors commenting, "You won't find many other places with such a high concentration full of your peers than college." It truly is a self-contained community, a great place to learn and figure out your road, but it is also a bubble. Once you leave college, things are a bit different. You'll have less structure, no one there to hold your hand and show you the way. It's important to get outside your comfort zone and try those new things. It's really the only way you'll grow. And like I said, learning new skills or trying new things can be hard, scary, frustrating, or exciting. And these feelings are all completely normal. The next lesson we have is finding your wolf pack. My dad and I are always the slowest guys in the group, finishing hours after most of the other riders had finished and gone to dinner. One day, my dad made a joke that we were always chasing after the quicker and more nimble deer. And that got me thinking about our group of riders, how we work together as a team to get through each day, supporting each other mentally and physically, and so we became the wolf pack. A wolf pack finds strength in his fellow wolves. They work together as a team, and it's what makes them a pack. Although it's possible to achieve your dreams alone, it's certainly much harder. For example, my friend Joshua Kenneth did a solo bike ride last summer all on his own, while raising money for his coworker undergoing chemotherapy. It took him 3 months to complete, and he finished it, but I remember him telling me that it was pretty lonely at times. Now, once you're out of college, even though there will always be people in the world who share those passions that you do, they won't be so easily found all the time. You can use that same mentality of finding strength in your fellow wolves, no matter where you are. It's important to surround yourself with the type of people who will support you in those goals, or go the distance. In this case of the bike ride, it was literal. Now let's meet the pack. We had over 20 other riders plus 4 staff members out on the road to help provide emotional and sometimes physical support. If you look closely, you'll see me on the bottom left, next to one of our staff members. A great example of this Wolfpack mentality on the road is the concept of a pace line, a line of riders that stick close together during those windy days. As you can see, there's a man in front who takes the brunt of what's called the headwind, making it easier for those following behind, which is called drafting. I had never really done this before on the ride, and up until this point, during my training, we would usually ride with plenty of space. For me, it was usually just my dad and I on those training rides. So at first it made me uncomfortable to be so close with the other riders. But it turned out to be a huge benefit, and then in fact one of the best aspects of riding with a group. You can use the same kind of mentality towards finding a career. Facebook is a great method of connecting with groups like that. If you like doing certain things, chances are you'll connect with a group that share those interests. You guys call it a tribe. Your Wolfpack should consist of like-minded people who share that passion. So connect with people online through LinkedIn who also will share your professional passion. Talk to them about their interests and connect with them on a personal level. It is much more effective than simply firing off resumes at someone. And don't be afraid to ask questions and reaching out to people you might already know. I personally used to be very reluctant with this. I didn't want to bother people in their busy lives. I didn't want to impose on them, but you'd be surprised at how willing most people are in sharing their passions with you and connecting. For example, during my time at JMU, one of my all-time favorite things was to hop in my car with a few friends and go hiking all over the Shenandoah Valley, seeing the Dark Hollow Falls, which you actually saw a picture of me earlier, hiking Old Rag, seeing some of the most incredible sunsets from Skyline Drive. During the summer of 2016, I was nearing the end of my career in the fitness industry. I wasn't sure what to do anymore, so I went online and started looking up organizations that shared my passion for outdoor activities. In August of 2016, I found this one particular blog called Adventure Junkies, run by a really cool couple, Amanda and Antonio, who met in New Zealand. After talking about our mutual adventures and my love for the outdoors, traveling, and biking, I learned that while I had been riding my cross-country bike ride, they had been riding around the world on their bikes. They wrote about all kinds of cool outdoor things, and so I connected with them in their Facebook group and we started exchanging emails and messaging. It totally opened up my world. I started talking with people from Australia who love to hike in the outback, people who did all kinds of biking ventures from all over the globe. A few weeks later, a freelance position came up on their blog for editing and writing, and because I'd already been talking with them, I actually got the job. For about 3 months, I had a chance to work closely with Amanda and Antonio, working with several other travel writers and learning how they produce their content for Adventure Junkies and connect with their tribe of adventurous and outdoor enthusiasts. It was an awesome experience, and even though I was scared to do it at times, it was extremely rewarding, and it never would have happened if I hadn't reached out and started connecting in the first place. So next we have detours in life. On the very first day of the bike ride, we were riding over 100 miles from Newport Beach to Palm Springs. It was through the desert, and it was over 100 degrees that day. By the end, I was so tired that I could barely concentrate on not falling over. Luckily, the wind was at our backs, and we were riding on a gentle downhill slope. However, it wasn't until 10 miles later that we realized we had taken a wrong turn. We had to turn around and climb back up the way we had just gone, and suddenly the gentle slope didn't feel so gentle anymore. Life is not a straight line, just like the sign above represents. And like I mentioned earlier in this webinar, I've worked at several different jobs in my life. It is very common to shift careers in this day and age. For example, while I was working as a concierge in Virginia, I was always working on my book. One of the residents' daughters-in-law would always come in and chat with me. And finally, she asked me one day what I was working on at the computer all the time. After explaining to her that I was working on a memoir of my cross-country bicycle ride and my love for fitness, she offered me a job. It turned out that she was the director of the local community center in Fairfax County, and before I knew it, I was working as a fitness attendant. My responsibilities mainly involved helping out gym members and cleaning equipment and machines. But I took it as a sign, and suddenly I had a whole vision of how my life was going to turn out from this point forward. I would combine my passion for physical fitness and my writing and start helping people change their own lives by becoming a personal trainer. I would use my writing to write articles on my blog on how to help people become healthier and happier. And so this started a 3-year journey. First, I was a fitness attendant, but before long, I had earned my personal training certification as well as a certification to becoming a spin instructor. Ultimately, though, despite my passion, I realized that my lifestyle as a personal trainer, combined with the financial constraints, wasn't going to work out in the long term. I was going to be getting married and still had some debt to pay off. So I decided to say goodbye to the fitness industry in November of 2016 and found myself starting all over again. Just like in college, where I had spent 4 years working towards a certain goal, after 3 years down this road, once again I was back to square one. However, I learned that with each detour I've taken, I believe that I've come closer to realizing what I truly want. Sometimes in life, it's about finding out what you don't want, which brings me to my next lesson on the road. Everybody falls off the bike. Don't worry, that's not actually me. It's some stock footage that I found on the internet. However, during the bike ride, I did fall off the bike at least 3 times that I can remember. I remember one time, it was actually during while I was texting, something you should never do. Another time, we hadn't even left the parking lot, and I fell right over in front of all the other riders. It was totally embarrassing, not to mention physically painful. At one point or another, though, everyone fails at something in their lives. Things would be pretty boring if you didn't, but how else would you learn? I felt some of those same emotions when I made the choice to end my fitness career and switch careers. I was pretty low, kind of embarrassed to talk to my friends and family about it. In a sense, I felt like my dream had collapsed. No human has ever become interesting by not failing. The more you fail and recover and improve, the better you are as a person. Ever met someone who's always had everything work out for them with zero struggle? They usually have the depth of a puddle, or they don't exist. For me, I knew that at least I had tried. If I hadn't gone after my dream, I would have always had questions about the road not taken. I had taken that leap, and even though that particular road didn't work out, I had still learned so much about what it meant to live a healthy lifestyle. Lessons that I can take with me for the rest of my life, no matter what direction I decide to go in. Lessons that I can share with other people. So don't go riding through life being afraid to fall off that bike. And the last lesson I have, ride your own road. When I first started down this journey after graduation, I had no idea what lay in store for me. All I knew were my own unique passions in life. We all have unique qualities that make us who we are, those things that bring us the most happiness. Writing has always been my biggest passion, and writing articles for my blog and writing for others has brought me a lot of joy and fulfillment in my life. My blog, Leaving on the Road, was initially created to share my experience with close friends and family. When I started it, several months before the actual ride in March 2013, I never intended it to become a full-time book. But several months after the completion of the ride, I realized that the more I talked about why I did it with people, the more they seemed to connect with similar issues in their own lives. Issues like feeling lost, confused, frustrated, maybe even a little isolated, like no one understands what I'm going through. I decided that if my story helps just one person feel less alone in their own struggle to find the happiness that I had found, then it would be worth it. It took me 3 years to write the book, but with the help and support of loved ones, friends, and other writers, who I like to think of as my own wolf pack, We released Legion on the Road in May of 2016, and I am now proud to call myself an author. Creating this book and sharing my story has brought me more joy than almost anything else I've ever done in my life, except for perhaps proposing to my fiance, Annie Marshall, which I was fortunate enough to do at the book launch in front of all of our friends and family. It was truly an amazing day. Annie has always believed in me and everything I've ever done, and I owe her a huge amount of appreciation and gratitude for her continual love and support in everything I do. So ask yourself what your passion might be, whatever it is, and stay true to it. Find people who share that passion and don't suppress it for any reason, no matter what others might think. Because you never know what road they might take you down. I hope that you enjoyed this webinar, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to me, and remember to keep leaving it on the road.
Thank you so much, Eric, for sharing your story. You know, I really appreciated just the realness of everything, of that personal and career development. You talked a lot about, really a lot of good stories about the importance of not only creating, but supporting and tapping into your network, and how a simple conversation can lead to ongoing opportunities. So I think we all can learn a lot just from that. We do have just a few questions, if you don't mind answering them.
Absolutely.
So one of them is, you know, what if the obstacles seem too great? You know, you talked about falling off the bike and everything, but I think we can all say that there have been times in life where, you know, that mountain just seems huge. How do you recommend somebody that's facing, you know, a huge obstacle challenges themselves or motivates themselves enough to try to take it on?
That's a great question. And yes, there are times on the bike where I did face actual mountains. And I remember starting at the bottom and just looking at this huge goal or obstacle and thinking, how do I get from here to there? How is it going to be possible for me? And for me, I'll go with a little bit of a bike metaphor where you take it one pedal stroke at a time, 1 mile at a time. But in real life circumstances, these obstacles are more mental, usually, especially when looking at a career. How do I get from graduation to getting that job? It gives me that kind of fulfillment. And my answer would be, like I mentioned, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to admit that, hey, maybe I don't quite know what I'm doing, but I could really use some advice, and being willing to open up a little bit and be slightly vulnerable. I know that's a hard word to hear for some people. I know for me, especially as a guy, using that word kind of suggests weakness, but in fact, I found that the more I was willing to be that kind of vulnerable person, the more other people saw that, wow, this guy has done this pretty cool thing, and even he has his own struggles, and they're more willing to open up and connect. So make sure that you're willing to open up with, it doesn't have to be, you know, strangers off the street. It could be your mom or dad or even a close friend. But definitely taking those first few steps can be difficult, but ultimately it's very rewarding and very helpful.
Great response. Another question that just rolled in, how do you discover your passion if you are just generally feeling lost?
That is a great question. I would answer that with just look at the things that you enjoy doing. Look at things that on an everyday basis, what brings you happiness. For example, I love Marvel Comics. One of my dreams is to write for Marvel Comics or work for them in some capacity. And that just started from me reading the comics. And you never think to yourself, how can I make that into a career? You know, how do I like that? you just talked about, getting from here to there. So look at your life, try to identify those things that bring you the most joy. It could be cooking. It could be, for me, hiking outdoors. It could be anything, playing music. A lot of people, I think, expect those answers to kind of appear out of nowhere, which is, like I mentioned in my webinar, I struggled with once I got out of college. And I think that if you really just take a step back, don't let those overwhelming questions try to swallow you up, and just look at it in a way that, what brings me the most joy out of my everyday activities, and try to connect with those people that also share those passions. You'll be amazed at how quickly and how almost as if things start taking on a life of their own once you start the ball rolling, that the answers will start coming to you. And it might be a little difficult at first to pinpoint exactly what those things are, but like I said, take a look at the joy that you find in simple things and try to find a way of connecting those dots.
I think that's great advice. I think it can be super overwhelming if you look at it as this giant question to answer, but if it's more like the small puzzle pieces in your life that you slowly start connecting, creates that whole. And that may not happen, you know, immediately after you graduate. You may be 15 years into your career and still piecing together what that passion is. So I think that's really good advice to share. Another question, and this is kind of like your 33-day ride, but after accomplishing something huge, you know, and maybe that win or that excitement wears off a little, how do you then continue to drive forward? How, I guess, do you find that next big motivator and keep that excitement, whether that's in your personal or professional development?
You know, that's a really great question, because I noticed in my life that I have experienced a period of downtime, and not in the good sense that you're relaxed and enjoying yourself, but downtime in the sense that, yes, I just accomplished this big goal, for example, graduating college, riding across the country. On the book launch, I also proposed to my fiance, and I remember in the days and weeks following, I did feel that sense of, once again, where am I going? I just accomplished this big kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Big kind of
milestone, or?
Thank you, milestone. That's exactly the word I was looking for. I had accomplished this big milestone in my life, and now I felt like there was somewhat of a void, and it can be a little bit overwhelming because you're expecting things to feel a certain way. I remember during my entire bike ride, I kept telling myself, oh yeah, these answers are going to come to me. I'm doing these amazing long distance rides, and I'm doing more things I've ever done, and it's great. You're on this real big high in the sense that you're accomplishing cool things every day. And I realized that it does take time for those lessons to sink in. So make sure you give yourself the patience to absorb those life lessons, because we do live in a day and age where things are very instantaneous with their gratification. You go on Facebook, you make a post, you get immediate likes, you get immediate responses. I have found that for me personally, and I think for a lot of people who ask themselves those questions, that they will experience the same kinds of downtime, and it takes a certain amount of time, and to be willing to give yourself that time and patience to really reflect and be honest with yourself about what is it that I've really learned. I find that that process becomes a little bit easier to deal with. I noticed that when I graduated college, it took me the entire summer to kind of get over that malaise and that sense of, what do I do now? And it was a little bit shorter after the bike ride, and then it was even shorter after the book launch. So as you get a little bit older, those things get a little bit easier to deal with, but they still are things that you should be aware of and be in tune with your emotions for that.
Absolutely. You talked a little bit about, your Wolfpack, and specifically you shared with us some biking insight. Maybe there's people on the webinar right now that didn't know these things, but about the drafting and how one person kind of takes the lead, and that's really kind of hones in on teamwork. So this question is just about, teamwork, and what were some of your experiences, having that team mentality. Sometimes some teams and some days it feels like everything's in sync, and sometimes there's struggles with those connections. So how did you kind of navigate that specifically on the road?
That's a great question. So when you're on the road, specifically for this kind of ride, communication is absolutely critical. I remember before we even set foot, or I should say, put our bikes down on the road, we had about 2-hour segment where we talked about all the different hand signals and verbal communications that we would go through. And sometimes during the ride, those signals would be lost, and some bike-on-bike collisions occurred. I remember at one point specifically in Dalhart, Texas, during the snowstorm, which I mentioned, there was a snowstorm in Texas, which was in May, which was just out of this world. The wind was so loud, the wind was so loud that we could not actually hear each other, and so I ended up clipping my dad's bike tire, and he went off the road. I went off into he went one way, I went the other. He ended up going off the road. I ended up going straight into the middle of the road, which was really dangerous. You're on a highway. But yeah, so sometimes there's miscommunication. We were both okay, and it was something that we've learned from. We started using more hand gestures that day to improve on our communication. But in all kinds of scenarios, there's going to be sometimes miscommunication, and it's okay to admit that, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said, or hey, I think I might have misread this situation. Be open about coming forward and talking about whatever might be holding you up at that point. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. I remember when I first started this job as a junior data analyst, I had a lot of questions, and I felt a little bit almost embarrassed to have to ask these questions and communicate that apprehension to my mentor who was training me at the time. But ultimately, everyone is, for the most part in a team, there to support one another. And so being open and honest is one of the most important things about growing and learning, especially when you're first starting out in your career.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more about communication being that foundation to teamwork. So that, again, is great advice for our listeners. Just a few more questions. As you know, graduation is about, 2 weeks away for some of our listeners. So what is if you could only provide one piece of advice for those about to graduate from JMU, what one piece of advice would that be?
Take it all in stride. Just allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, whatever those emotions might be. Don't try to force whatever kinds of expectations you think you should be feeling. Don't let that ruin the day, because things are going to be emotional. Things are going to be in flux. You're going to be asking yourself a lot of questions. Some of you might already have jobs, and you might be worrying about, oh man, I got this job, but I don't really know what exactly I should be doing. Some of you might not have that job yet and might be worrying about that fact. Enjoy that day, because you earned it. You just spent 4 years working towards getting whatever degree it is, and you should be very, very proud of that fact, and allow yourself to spend that time with your family, spend that time with your friends, and just reflect on that accomplishment, and don't let that future of whatever it might be, those questions you might be asking, don't let it interfere with your awesome day, because you really did earn this and you should be very proud of that fact.
Absolutely. And being a Duke is an amazing thing.
Absolutely.
So one thing for our listeners and anyone that will be, watching this recorded, can you provide at least one actionable thing that you would encourage the listeners to do today to help them in, discovering that passion or learning from the life lessons that you provided? One thing they could do today as a step towards figuring it out.
That's a great question, and my answer would be, the thing that sprang into my mind was, it's very easy. Go on Facebook and look up, there's so many groups on Facebook. There are niches for everyone. If you have an interest, there are chances are that on the internet you're going to find and connect with people that enjoy those similar interests. For example, like I said with Adventure Junkies, I really enjoy hiking. I love writing. I kind of just started going on the web. Doesn't necessarily have to be Facebook, I should say, but just start looking up organizations that reflect your passions, whatever they might be. It really doesn't matter. If you enjoy writing about music, if you enjoy, even if it's, I really like to, I like driving really expensive cars. It doesn't have to be anything. There's really nothing that's too outlandish or outrageous to start looking into when you're trying to find where you fit into the world. Because once you find a group of people who share those passions, when you start talking with them on that level, on that authentic level, you'd be amazed at the kinds of opportunities that will come up. I know I've said this earlier, but it is true. And once you start doing it, I would say the hardest part is starting to move, I guess, get the ball rolling. Because like I mentioned before, I had a lot of apprehension and I didn't want to bother people. They're living their lives. But when you start genuinely asking questions that you genuinely are interested in, and people can tell when you're not being authentic, when you're just kind of, I just kind of wanted to talk to you because I'm more interested in this job than I am about what your hobbies or interests might be. When you connect with them on that level, on their passions, you'd be surprised at the kinds of opportunities that will come up.
Absolutely. Seeing people as people and not as a stepping stone for your own personal goals.
Definitely.
Couldn't agree more. Two more questions here, and then we will wrap some things up. This one's just a fun one. What is one of your favorite JMU memories? I know you talked about your hikes and everything, but is there anything else that stands out about your time at JMU? And that could be as a student or as an alum.
Oh no, I can tell you right now that one of my favorite memories of all time is probably as a JMU freshman, actually. When I joined the triathlon club, I was asked to participate in my first triathlon. I had no training whatsoever, and it was nationals. So that's all the colleges all over the country participated in this event, together with, I think it was 9 other Dukes, including my best friend who is now a Marine, Pat. We went to Lubbock, Texas, and I can still remember the same kinds of emotions that I have felt for any kind of experience when I'm about to go do something I've never done before. I'm out of my comfort zone. We're getting up at dawn. I remember watching the sunrise on the Texas landscape. It was pretty cool as everyone was driving to the location. And it was one of the hardest but most rewarding experiences I've ever done. For those of you who are not familiar with an Olympic distance triathlon, I believe it is a mile swim, so you're in the water for a mile, I want to say it's a 56-mile bike ride,
Wow.
or is it 23? I'm sorry, I think it's 23, so it's a little bit less extreme. And then I believe it's a 6-mile run. So up until this point, I had no training whatsoever on this, but I was with a group of people who supported me, a Wolfpack you can call it, before I even realized what that term meant. It was incredible. I had my fellow Dukes with me, which was really amazing. I ran with some really awesome triathletes, and at the end of the day, I remember I could barely walk, and I had my phone out, and I was telling my parents that I had just done this pretty wild thing, and it was extremely satisfying knowing that I had done it with JMU in mind and pushing myself physically. It was pretty awesome.
Yes, that's a great story. I love asking that questions of our presenters, because everyone just has such a personal memory to share, and that one's really cool. The last question is just how our listeners can reach out to you if they have more questions, if they'd like to get more information about your memoir or blog. If you don't mind sharing where they could get connected with you, that would be great.
Absolutely. So for my book, you can just go on Amazon or iUniverse. It's an outlet for books, but Amazon's pretty easy to find, as I'm sure everyone knows. You can type in "Leaving It on the Road," and my book will be one of the first things that comes up. As far as my blog goes, right now it is currently down for maintenance, but you can find it once it's back up at www.leavingitontheroad.com. And I would love to hear from anyone who might be interested in sharing with me some of their own struggles, or perhaps looking for fitness advice. Anything really that comes to mind, I would love to connect with you on my personal email at Wagner, W-A-G-N-E-R, Robert, R-O-B-E-R-T, Eric, E-R-I-C, 13 @gmail.com. And I hope to hear from you.
That's great. Thanks so much for sharing that information. Well, again, on behalf of the JMU Alumni Association, I want to thank you, Eric, for your time and presentation today and sharing your story with us. I'm sure a lot of us will hopefully pick up your memoir and hear some of those stories that you learned on the road. I think it'll be a really exciting read. And I want to thank our listeners, whether you are live or now listening to the recording. We appreciate you taking the time to focus on your professional journey. I do ask that if you're attending live, please take a moment to complete the survey you'll receive when you exit the webinar, as your feedback helps us to continue to provide tailored programming for you, our alumni. I also want to note that May, which is coming up quickly, is Career and Networking Month, and we are featuring 2 alumni webinar presentations. The first one will be Friday, May 5th, featuring Corey Schwartz, a 2006 grad, as he delivers his webinar on the soft skills you need in your toolbox, called The Powerful 7. And on Thursday, May 18th, 2016 grad Mia Brabham will share with you the ups, downs, twists, and turns of her first year post-grad in a year of lessons. Definitely check out all that May has to offer, from networking events, keynotes to panels, webinars, and our newest 31 in 31 challenge. It's an entire month dedicated to helping you cultivate your professional self. So again, thank you so much, Eric. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you all have a great afternoon, and go Dukes.
Go Dukes. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you.